The 2 o'clock hour is not usually suitable to large audiences, and here we have filled the room, which is testament to Laurence and the story he's told. My name is David Myers. I teach in the Department of History, and I am an affiliated faculty member of the Center for Jewish Studies, the Levy Center, which is very pleased to welcome you to the Arnold Band Distinguished Lecture in Jewish Studies. I'll say a word about Arnie in just a minute, but I do want to just share with you how my own Los Angeles story is coterminous with Jewish books in a very meaningful way, and in fact with the bookstore that will be the subject of our talk this afternoon. So I grew up on the East Coast, was educated on the East Coast, and my wife was also educated, born and educated on the East Coast, and I was writing a dissertation at Columbia in the field of Jewish history, and my wife completed her law degree and was on the academic job market in law, and received a bunch of offers from very prestigious law schools across the country. And one of them, and perhaps the least well known to us, was the University of Southern California Law School. When she was out for her job interview, she was put up in Santa Monica, and she made her way to an antiquarian bookseller and bought a book and brought it back to me and said, "This is what you can find in Los Angeles." What this book was a Festschrift, a celebratory volume in honor of the 90th birthday of Leopold Suntz, the founding father of modern Jewish studies. And I said to myself, I think Los Angeles is a possibility. USC then, after agreeing to offer my wife a job, brought both of us out as a kind of recruitment visit. And during that visit, two very important things happened. The first was that I paid a visit to a former teacher of mine at Yale, who had been visiting from UCLA for a year, by the name of Arnold Band. And I'm not exactly sure if Arnie remembered who I was, but he feigned, quite uncharacteristically, he feigned knowledge. And we really connected. And I became aware of sort of the literary and scholarly circle that he and Ora had created in their home, 333 South Lapeer. And that was very heartwarming. But the other very memorable thing that happened was a very fortuitous walk that my wife and I took from our hotel, a little small hotel in Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. We heard tell of a Jewish bookstore in town. And we said, oh, it's only 2 blocks down, right, from Wilshire to Pico, and that's basically 2 blocks. And the clerks at the hotel said, well, yeah, but you don't walk, you drive. We did walk. A half hour or whatever it was, 25 minutes later, we made our way to that corner on Pico Boulevard and entered this extraordinary world that altogether altered my impression of what Los Angeles was. I had very little knowledge of what Los Angeles was. That was 37 years ago. We walked into that place that was very meticulously and deliberately designed to foster a sense of an old world bookstore, as Laurence tells in the book. And there I encountered Jack Roth for the first time, and the world that Jack Roth had created here in Los Angeles. And it really was transformative for me. I really hadn't imagined. I imagined Los Angeles was, in the worst ways of a stereotypical East Coast person, a vast empty wasteland. And altogether, that impression was dispelled, exploded immediately. And from that time, I felt a very deep bond, I have to tell you, Laurence, with Jack Roth and his books, and kind of followed along the journey of the rise and sad fall of J. Roth Bookseller. From 9427 West Pico Boulevard to 9020 West Olympic. I didn't make my way to the La Cienega iteration of the store. All of this is to say that Laurence Roth has undertaken a really spectacular literary project that has been pulled off with great, great aplomb and makes for a most compelling read. I would say even if you aren't from Los Angeles and even if you didn't know J. Roth Bookseller. This book is at once a biography of a bookstore, of Jack Roth, of Laurence, of a relationship, of a family, of the place of the Jewish book and Jewish book culture in the United States. It's all of those things, and told in really spellbinding fashion. I can't emphasize enough how important, on my own cultural and mental landscape, but I think also on the landscape of American Jewish culture, that bookstore was. And now we have its story. And now we have its story. Not every great bookstore gets its story told in this way. But it is our great good fortune that Laurence has told the story. And who is Laurence? Well, he's known to virtually everyone here, and you probably know him better than I do, even though I know him, I've known him for many years. But he is, to complete the formal procedure that we are called upon to undertake here, the Charles B. Degenstein Professor of English and Director of the Jewish and Israel Studies Program and the Build Collaborative, about which I heard at lunch, at Susquehanna University in Pennsylvania. He's the author of Inspecting Jews, American Jewish Detective Stories, and the editor of a number of other important volumes in the field of Jewish studies. But most important for us, he's the author of this book, which is imperative for everyone in this audience to buy and read as an act of cultural fealty to the project of Jewish books. It's called Unpacking, My Father's Bookstore, and I'm delighted to present to you Professor Laurence Roth.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And also, David, for your friendship with my father and with me ever since I was in graduate school, your wise advice, constant wise advice. I also want to thank the Leaf Center for inviting me to give this reading and talk. Thank you to William Schniedewind and the Lecture Advisory Board. My thanks also to Chelsea White for all your help with arrangements. Thank you, too, to all my friends and family who have filled up all the chairs in this room, who've come to hear and support me this afternoon. And, of course, to my wife, Mary Bannon, and my son, Jonah. Without you both, I could not have written this book. I'm also incredibly honored and deeply moved to return to UCLA after all these years to give a lecture named for Arnold Band. He was my father's friend and a loyal customer who lent crucial support to the store as it struggled near the end. He was also one of my dissertation advisors, and then a cheerleader for this book when I made a first stab at writing it. Always a generous mentor and guide as I began and then built my career in Jewish studies and in academic life. I can't help but feel he's watching, which, to be honest, makes me kind of nervous, given his famously steely and spot-on critiques. So in his memory, then, let's begin. As you can see here, that's a quick picture of the store. I just wanted to point out that playing the violin is my brother, Alan. Alan, wave, who played violin at that opening in 1979. That's my uncle Jack Konigsberg to the right there, speaking to the fellow who has a whole lot of hair. That fellow is me once upon a time, a long time ago. So just for those who may not be aware, I'm sorry? Oh, that's Pico and I'm blanking out. Elm, thank you. Pico and Elm. Yes. So the locations and dates and operations, just to give folks a little background, a little orientation, you can see that my father launched his retail career by buying Michael Herelik's bookshop, which was founded in 1948. And then from 66 to 79, the store was called Herelik and Roth. And it was located on La Cienega Boulevard with a branch store briefly that was run by my mother in the San Fernando Valley from 1973 to 1974. From 79 to 94, it was J. Roth Bookseller, Fine and Scholarly Judaica, located first on Pico Boulevard and then on Olympic. So that gives you a pretty good idea of the larger scheme of the store's history and place in Los Angeles. That's my dad, standing outside of the Pico location. I want to start by reading the first mini chapter from the book to give you a sense of the challenges that I faced and the choices I made in figuring out how to write this book in the first place, because perhaps as some of you know, writing memoir is very difficult, especially when you're dealing with family. So this is entitled Sotheby's Manhattan, 1985. Dad, the guy you bought the Copenhagen Haggadah from, did he come back Monday or Friday? He came in Friday and we waited for him all day Monday. Really? I remember he came on Monday and then we waited Friday for him to come back. We were totally sweating whether he'd be back before we closed at 4 for Shabbos. No, we waited Monday, right? Yes. How does this story go? Whom should I trust? My fallible memory or my father's now failing one? I think he came in on Monday, Dad. It was fall of '82, before Ben came home the next year, and I was still at the store full time. Was it '82? Jack looks down at his hands folded neatly in his lap as he leans back on the red sofa in my den in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. His still trim 88-year-old frame rests easily on the cushions, and he's dressed in his usual outfit. Dark brown tailored slacks, a brown and tan checked sports shirt from Brooks Brothers, tan silk socks, and russet brown tasseled loafers. We're at work again this afternoon, trying to clear up details from his past about the Jewish bookstore he owned and operated in Los Angeles for 28 years. And I'm tired, though not from our conversation. Almost 20 inches of snow is piled up on the front lawn, but the walkway and sidewalk in front of the house are clear after I'd spent all morning in the cold struggling to dig them out with my cheap shovel. Jack had watched me work from behind the glass storm door at our entryway, his arms behind his back and neatly combed white hair crowning his head. He occasionally flashed me a thumbs-up signal what a fine job I was doing. Judging again, I thought. But I couldn't tell whether he approved of my progress or I had shoveled the snow in what he deemed was the correct way. Let's say it was '82 for now, I continue. He came in on Monday and walked up to the front counter where I was sitting, and I thought he was just another person, not Jewish, from the bus stop out front, who confused the Pico store for a regular bookshop. But then he said he had a book he wanted to sell. It was wrapped in something paper or maybe cloth, and when he unwrapped it, I knew I had to get you. You came out and I saw immediately from how you talked that he had something really valuable. I had to be careful, Jack cuts in, but I didn't want him to get away. He got it from his mother. They were Gentiles, and she worked for a rich family in Hungary. She was their maid, I think. They gave it to her, he said, as a token of appreciation for her work when they had to let her go, you know, when the Nazis came in. Maybe it was really for safekeeping and she just told him that, or she stole it, whatever. They all died and then she came to the U.S. after the war. I offered him $1,200, but I didn't want to seem too eager, so I told him he could take his time and think about it. Yeah, and you started freaking out after he left because you didn't think he'd be back or that he'd go over to Fairfax. What are you talking about, freaking out? I didn't freak out. Jack's look of disgust at my description warns me to tidy my memory just as I did my walkway, making it neat and spotless in the way he likes. Otherwise, we'll just start arguing and I'll get nothing out of him. You were concerned, I meant to say, right? Sure, I was concerned. He could have gone somewhere else, but he came back and I gave him the $1,500. It was $1,500? Right, and he came in just as I was ready to close, and I gave him a check. The Haggadah was done in 1779, just beautiful. It was illuminated, and I kept it in the safe deposit box at the bank. I'd go and look at it, but it wasn't good to keep it there. So I sold it at Sotheby's. You made a good profit on it. Well, I bought it for $1,200 and it went for $150,000 at auction, so I guess I did okay. Jack says he needs to lie down for a while, and as he climbs the stairs, I put in my notes that $1,200 is probably the right amount since he repeated it twice. But this is the game I play with him and with myself. I'm improvising because I've never done this before, and instead of recording him, I find it easier to write everything down, which is, I'm sure, exactly what I shouldn't be doing. It's just that I hate putting a recorder or microphone between us. I prefer to jot down what he's saying when he says it. Yes, I'm a professor and I know how this should work, but I'm also the only son asking him to tell his stories, so I'm doing this my way. I get to decide. Bullshit, says Alana, Jack's second wife, when I later tell her about his version of the Sotheby's story. It seems that $1,500 really is what Jack paid for the Haggadah, because she was there and has the tax returns to prove it. And no, he didn't write a check either because she told him not to use the store's checking account for the purchase, so that the Haggadah wouldn't be part of the store's inventory. He paid the guy in cash. I quickly run through the rest of Jack's story with her, that he called Sotheby's to begin arrangements and they put him in touch with one of their affiliated appraisers in LA, who said the Haggadah was worth only $15,000, obviously too low. So then he called George Snyder, Sotheby's Judaica specialist at the time, who recognized its real value. Alana laughs. $15,000 was the amount a customer in Hancock Park offered Jack for the Haggadah, and he was considering taking it. She and her business colleague had to sit him down and explain what a bad idea that was. It was they who convinced him to take it to Sotheby's for auction. They even had to talk him into setting a reserve on the sale, the confidential minimum price below which a lot won't be sold. It was $150,000, precisely the amount it sold for, she says. Jack had previously sent me the Sotheby's catalog for the sale, so I had already seen the sale results and a sale confirmation notice. They were both tucked into the page where Lot 19 is listed in important Judaica, books, manuscripts, and works of art, New York, Monday, November 25, 1985. Haggadah, Seder Haggadah Shel Pesach, in Hebrew, instructions in various passages in Judeo-German. Written in the letters of Amsterdam, in Copenhagen, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 1779, by the scribe Yehuda Leib HaKohen. Manuscript on vellum, 20 leaves including one blank, 8.5 by 7.5 inches, 21.5 by 19 centimeters. Written in a fine square Ashkenazi rabbinic and cursive Hebrew script, pointed and unpointed, illuminated with decorative vignettes and panels. Slight staining, some portions smudged, contemporary paneled calf gilt, rubbed, in a tapestry cloth container. The notice reveals that the reserve was indeed $150,000, which was also the low estimate. The high estimate was $200,000. The sale results say that the Haggadah sold for $165,000. So after Sotheby's took its 10% commission, Jack walked away with $148,500, or about $460,000 in today's money. This was the most important purchase and sale of my father's bookselling career. His reclamation of a nearly lost work of European Judaica was to him a great mitzvah. He helped preserve a remnant of Israel, a testament to the economic and cultural clout his generation of American Jews wielded after the Holocaust. And its auction put him over the top as a financial success, confirming in his mind that he was, at last, the sophisticated upscale bookseller that he aspired to be. It was the gold nugget of his California dream, and he cashed it in. For me, though, it was all vicarious, which is why I'm less concerned with pinning down an exact and verifiable version of Jack's purchase and sale than I am with exploring all the avenues of meaning in his, or rather, in our story. Don't mistake my concern about control as the entire picture here. I also found a few small grains of bullion back in the Golden State, but mine are merely a metaphor for another kind of value. Sure, I'm grateful that Jack sent me photos of every page in the Copenhagen Haggadah, and if I simply wanted to document his good taste, they'd be crucial. No, for me, the most precious items in these stories about his bookstore are those details in the background, or just off camera, in major scenes like the sale of the Haggadah. That's where I was. That's where my brothers were, all three of us bit players, extras. And having been there, having witnessed those scenes, I can imagine myself into my father's world. Like this scene, his procession to Sotheby's in the early afternoon of November 25. It's a cool day, mid-40s outside, with a few clouds and the mostly sunny sky above the Waldorf Astoria, my father's favorite hotel in New York. I see Jack in a silk scarf and tan corduroy trench coat bought from Saks Fifth Avenue, exiting from the glass revolving doors on Park Avenue, following Alana, who's wearing her fur coat. Jack pulls out a money clip from his right pocket, peeling off a few dollar bills for the doorman, who rushes to get them into one of the yellow cabs lined up at the curb. As they head uptown to Sotheby's new flagship building and world headquarters at 1334 York Avenue, a former cigar factory and Kodak warehouse, Jack is excited, perhaps thumbing through the sale catalog, whose frontispiece is a reproduction of his Haggadah's title page. Photos of two other pages from the Haggadah are included in the overleaf following the lot listing. And though no estimate is included in the listing, estimate on request, Jack knows that it's the most expensive item up for auction. It's worth more than any of the Isidore Kaufmann paintings, the Ilya Shore Silver Sabbath candelabra, or even the important German carved and painted wood circumcision ceremony box, late 17th century, featured on the cover of the catalog. Jack and Alana are whisked upstairs to the private seating area above the bidding room, windowed skyboxes as the Financial Times calls them, where other sellers with high-value lots wait for the auction to begin at 2 p.m. promptly. When it does, Jack watches the action below with fascination. Here he is, the kid from Corona, Queens, the youngest son of an immigrant shochet, a ritual slaughterer, finding himself gratifyingly elevated in more ways than one. The crying of Lot 19 begins. Jack tries to keep track of who's bidding, but a number of potential buyers are calling in by phone to preserve their anonymity, so he can only guess who's on the line. The Israel Museum, the Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam. It's all moving quickly now. He feels a jolt of excitement when the bids rise above the reserve. He tries to interpret the auctioneer's movements, and then suddenly he hears the familiar refrain. Going once, going twice, sold. Jack turns to Alana and smiles, rolling his eyes the way he usually does when his face registers surprise or wonder. He thinks the Haggadah was bought by the owner of a chemical company who's noted for his Judaica collection, but that's just a hunch. Soon he's caught up in the flurry of activity after the sale, signing forms, shaking hands, though he can't help trying to keep an eye on what's happening with the other lots. After all, he's a collector too. Can I imagine his daydreams as well on the way back to the Waldorf? This is where I pause, right where I picture the future about to unroll in front of my father, like some celestial red carpet that I can only walk backward. I'm writing this, after all, from where it leads, tired after digging out my property from a night of snowfall, and still trying to be the good son, or at least the only one willing to weather his endless criticism. Remembering that I grew up in a town where red carpets always look better on camera than they do in real life. Is my version of the story any better than anyone else's in the family? Is it any less true? Maybe I'm just playing a private round of three-card Monte, where there's no honest shuffling, only a sleight of hand meant to confuse the mark. Me trying to outsmart myself. But my father's story is as much mine as it is his in a certain sense, and I need to tell it as I experienced it, as I lived it with my family, and as I remember it. Looking up from my notebook, I watch Jack return from the guest bedroom and quickly inspect my sofa to see if it's still clean enough for him to sit on. I'll never know exactly what he was thinking that day at Sotheby's, but always I wonder, between the books and the art and the well-appointed Jewishness in which he clothed himself, what else did he want to do with all that money? What was that man trying to purchase? Why can't I let that question go? So I structured the book after that. Thank you, you're very kind. Thank you. After figuring out how to write it, I structured the book so that in each chapter, what I do is I explore a particular theoretical theme: objects, commerce, place, gender, collection, design, sound, networks, which all allowed me to connect the store to larger historical forces, and to consider an aspect of the store's physical presentation so as to recall a particular period in its history. The stories I tell follow a roughly chronological order. I touch on literal and figurative beginnings in the first few chapters. In the middle chapters, I tally the emotional and material costs incurred by my father's beliefs and obsessions. And in the last chapters, I recount how I found myself behind his sales counter just in time to be a witness to the bookstore's final act. To illustrate how my father's bookstore was a microcosm of the LA Jewish community, I want to read you 3 short selections from the book. So this is the first La Cienega iteration of the store. I'm going to read from the chapter entitled The Inventory, Commerce, the one in which I detail the beginnings of Jewish bookselling in the U.S. and New York, and my father's beginnings in the book trade. He was a product of a commercial world that placed great value on handshakes and hand selling. And he aspired to bring bookselling out of what he called the Jewish bazaar, which was his term for the dirty and chaotic bookstores of the Lower East Side, and to make it into something finer and more literary. So returning to New York after a stint in the Army at the end of the Korean War, he landed a job as the general manager at Behrman House, which is a major Jewish publisher. Working at the company's office at the Empire State Building, he viewed the old booksellers down on the East Side as colorful but out of date. They still clung to the bazaar. When Bernard Morgenstern, whose bookshop was a hole in the wall with mostly worthless Judaica and Hebraica, saw Jack at Behrman House, he'd always open his jacket and show him the spot in his trouser waist where he kept his cash hidden. The humor was that he kept it there in case he suddenly discovered for sale a piece of incunabula, using the highfalutin Gentile term for the very first printed books, which Morgenstern always hoped he'd stumble across going from bookstore to bookstore looking to buy anything old, rare, and Jewish. That wasn't Jack's style, though. He didn't want to sit in front of a Jewish bookstore the way Mr. Beagleisen did, with a pile of index cards in hand, listing his Yakar HaMitziut, his worthiest finds, the most valuable books he carried, just in case a collector should come by. Jack preferred an inventory that was properly listed, advertised and circulated in printed catalogs, just like regular book dealers. Neat and professional. Had I absorbed that attitude? Is that why I disliked the way the Chabad rabbi inspected our home as if he were looking at our private index cards? What kind of collector did he think he was? We ran a different kind of Jewish operation, employed a more sophisticated hand-selling script, and perhaps I picked up not just my father's desire for control over our inventory, but also his liking for a more fashionable presentation of it. He'd call it more dignified. I'd call it his Jewish version of mid-century Madison Avenue, that sleek yet clubby style of modern commercial identity that dressed up consumer goods with the trappings of privilege. It was a white masculinist mainstream business aesthetic that beguiled my father and me and a rising American Jewish middle class. You could say that was Jack's personal bookstore brand, which at that point just needed a family and a brick and mortar location for its full flowering. In 1957, my father married Rochelle Teilheimer, whose parents had fled Germany in the mid-30s and owned a house in a respectably upper-middle-class section of Forest Hills. In 1958, their first child, my brother Alan, was born. Working for Behrman House, Jack learned the fine details of the Jewish book trade more through careful watching than through any mentoring. As the product of a thorough Jewish education, conversant in the ideas, personalities, and historical trends of the Orthodox and Yiddish-speaking worlds, he seemed a ready-made employee to his boss, Jacob Behrman. Left to his own devices, my father used the position to further another kind of education. He noted the expansion of Judaica lists at the general publishing houses and the growing trade in Jewish textbooks. And he discovered, via phone calls and business trips to conferences for organizations like the National Association of Temple Educators, a growing network of Jewish synagogues, schools, and bookstores across the country. Then, on an especially torrid day in May 1966, trapped in the steamy confines of a New York City subway car, my father swore to himself that this was the last year he'd suffer through such an unbearable commute. Without telling Behrman, he flew to Los Angeles and made a deal with a Jewish bookseller he'd met back in 1960 when the National Association of Temple Educators convened in Los Angeles. Michael Horelik was happy to sell his store to his new young friend, but that's a story for the next chapter in my father's career. At the end of this one, in August, a Mayflower moving truck pulled up in front of our apartment in a building just off the Long Island Expressway in Queens, a block over from Junction Avenue. My parents double-checked the list of family belongings and personal effects, took one last look around the bare apartment, and then packed their three boys, ages 3, 5, and 7, into a new 1965 powder blue Valiant. It rode low because of all the weight. We headed south out of New York, driving through the Shenandoah Valley to pick up US 40 to Oklahoma City, and then following parts of old Route 66 into Arizona. No time for constant bathroom breaks. My brothers and I peed into an empty juice bottle. We dropped down US 15 to US 10 and came into downtown Los Angeles on the Golden State Freeway, all of us craning our heads this way and that, amazed at the multi-level on-ramps and connectors rising above us. A police siren sounded, and we turned as one to see a highway patrolman on a motorcycle behind us, signaling my father to pull over. Jack rolled his window down, and the patrolman leaned into it. "Did you realize you were traveling too slow? That's against the law." "No, I didn't," said my father. "I'm trying to get to the Santa Monica freeway. We've been driving for the last week. I'm moving my family to LA, and this is all confusing. Can I see your license?" He headed back to his motorcycle, and my parents spoke quickly and quietly to each other. I didn't catch what they were saying from the back seat. The patrolman reappeared. "Okay, sir, I'm going to let you go this time, but you need to pick it up. Follow the speed of traffic. Welcome to LA." My father thanked him. Did I see him shake the cop's hand? I can't remember. As the patrolman walked to his bike behind us, my father turned to give my mother a look and slipped his Ray-Bans on. Then, glancing back over his shoulder once, twice, 3 times, he hit the accelerator and pulled into the heavy, fast stream of cars going west. So, thank you. The store's golden age, as I think David kind of mentioned, really was the Pico store. And this is a picture of the inside of that store. And so I always thought one of the determinants, crucial determinants, of my father's success during his store's golden age in the 70s and the 80s was the design of his store. It illustrated both a general mythology about bookstores, that they sell a very special product, part consumer good and part fantasy, that turns a bookstore into a temple of commerce, a place of worship. And my father's belief in a genteel Judaism of fine and scholarly Judaica that offered his customers an honorable space where you could do a mitzvah, wrapped as a service, offered up with a dignity befitting a heritage. It was designed, especially in the Pico location, which you see there, that both appealed to and helped retail the wide variety of observances, practices, and identities being assembled in LA during those decades, a product of post-1960s religious and cultural reappraisal and experimentation. This is from the chapter The Book-Lined Wall design. My father's book-lined wall was his interpretation of an ideal Jewish bookstore, as that ideal existed in his mind and through his discovery of the famous bookstores of his era. If that interpretation inside our family seemed an imprisonment of sorts, its design nevertheless resonated with Jack's customers, just not always in the way or for the reasons he thought it should. I moved to Los Angeles, California in early 1979, which is when I began visiting the La Cienega shop Misha Liebson wrote me. She was a student at the University of Judaism up on Mulholland Drive, today the American Jewish University, or was the American Jewish University, studying for her teacher certification. When the shop was on La Cienega, I would visit about once a month or so. When the shop moved to Pico, I visited there about 2-4 times a semester. The location at the latter I found too busy. I loved the home feel of the first store. It seemed stacked with goodies to find. The second location was a bit more organized. It felt more like a regular shop versus the old-fashioned nickel and dime store where one often felt like they had just stumbled upon an unknown goodie long lost by or misplaced by another. The customer service at the La Cienega store was comical. Sometimes at the first store, I felt like I had fallen into family interactions and whatever was happening was happening. At the Pico establishment, the customer care was professional and exacting. While warm, it was not quite as Hamisha. The second store had the ambience of a bookstore with sometimes a semi-hushed sound. Customers like Liebson saw how Jack's design transitioned from a homey to a more professional guise, how the scholarly aspect of the store was made fine. The one constant for her and others was that the store's book-lined walls stocked everything from religion titles to, quote, knickknacks that were well worth dreaming about, though unreachable on a student's budget. Altogether, the Jewish world seemed to be safe within those walls. As the Pico store settled into its retail life, reactions to its style and feel focused more and more on its aesthetic refinement. "I'm only sorry I didn't have more time to linger in your beautiful shop," wrote the author Faye Moskowitz to Jack on stationery from the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in 1985. That year, the new librarian at Temple Beth Am wrote about the Pico store in the Association of Jewish Libraries of Southern California newsletter. "It was so bright and cheerful that I thought the sun had come out. Everything was clean, and the books were displayed neatly, allowing easy access to all of them. He lauded Jack, of course, for his hand-selling prowess, and for the diversity of his subject categories in stock that made the store, he said, one of the best sources I have seen for books on Judaica. Around the same time, the Jewish Journal astutely observed the very British-looking sign across the Pico Boulevard side of the store, in its short piece about fads and fancies in Jewish book buying, which according to Jack included books on intermarriage and the Holocaust. He admitted in the feature that he wasn't related to Philip, Henry, or Cecil Roth, but if he could choose, he'd prefer Cecil, the general editor of the Encyclopedia Judaica, who was not only a real Oxford Don, but also a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and the Royal Society of Literature. Jack liked, and his bookstore attracted the Jewish intelligentsia, so I wasn't surprised that the sharpest observations relayed to me about the book-lined walls of Roth Bookseller during its golden age came from the anthropologist Riv Allen Prell, a loyal customer in those years. The participants in Chavurot, the fellowships of countercultural Jews, creating new communities of Jewish religious renewal that were the subject of her first book, had turned her on to the bookstore back when it was located on La Cienega. The beauty, cleanliness, and welcoming atmosphere of the Pico store, however, impressed her as special, particularly in contrast with the unaesthetic and religiously intimidating stores on Fairfax. The space was airy, light, and comfortable, and Jack never talked down to anyone or made them feel as if they didn't belong there. Most importantly, from her perspective, the bookstore's visual appeal and solicitous service to all who entered, whatever their degree of observance or knowledge, tapped into the contemporary Chavurah-inspired interest in beautifying the mitzvot, celebrating Jewish ethnicity, and taking Jewish culture seriously. Customers could find both everyday items and aspirational goods, exquisite things that they might one day afford. And the span of its book selection across the religious, cultural, and political spectrum perfectly served the fast-growing aesthetic of do-it-yourself Judaism and Jewishness. Listening as Prell talked, I was reminded again of the book-lined wall's multi-sided nature, that just because it fosters the suspension of disbelief doesn't mean that the belief it does foster is always and suspiciously some form of false consciousness. A usable myth may sometimes be just what we need to find our better selves. So that was the high point. This is the Olympic store. This is 9020 West Olympic. This was the final location. As I like to remind people, though it looks romantic from the outside, running a bookstore is always a dicey business. Evan Friss, in his recent book on the history of American bookshops, told me when I met him that every child of a bookseller that he'd ever met always seemed to have sad stories to tell about their store, and so I suppose I fit in that too. But for my father, the hard times began in 1990. When, because of the structural retrofitting of the Pico store after the Loma Prieta earthquake, the consequent damage to his inventory, and his ensuing decision to move his business from Pico to Olympic Boulevard, he found himself seriously undercapitalized. Commercially, that left him with fewer resources with which to respond to the resurgence of Orthodox Judaism, the burgeoning Baal Tshuva phenomenon, and political developments in Israel that turned the question of who is a Jew into an international Jewish brawl. Then a group of neo-traditionalist Orthodox Jews started a boycott of the store because not only didn't he have enough and the right kind of sforim, religious books, but he also didn't wear a kippah and carried unkosher books by reform, feminist, and LGBTQ writers. The concurrent rise of the book superstores, Crown Books, Bookstore, Borders, Barnes & Noble only made things worse. So here's how the loss of his Orthodox networks felt in 1992 and 93 in the chapter titled Collections and Networks. Jack was getting torn down by the stress of being underfinanced and under siege. The neo-traditionalists continued their boycott, and while he appreciated the loyalty of LA's liberal Jews, he couldn't keep the store afloat with only their patronage. But he was ambivalent about getting out of the book business. Some days he'd look around the quiet sales floor and mutter something about closing up and walking away, or that he should have gone to work for the State Department when he was younger. Negotiating with foreign countries would have been easier than negotiating with his fellow Jews. Other days, he'd be energized by his customers, telling them that he wasn't going anywhere, and joking that he'd have to be carried out of the store feet first. It wasn't an idle boast. During the 1992 uprising after the acquittal of Rodney King, Jack worried that the burning and looting would flow west on Olympic from Koreatown and onto his doorstep, putting him in the same boat as the Korean merchants who were abandoned by the police and had to protect their businesses by themselves. He didn't know that the Beverly Hills police had drawn defensive lines around that city and that the Los Angeles police had deployed in force to protect the majority white West Side from the pent-up anger of those on the East Side who had long suffered under LA's geographic racism. He stayed in his store anyway. Clearly, the store still meant too much to him. He couldn't just walk away. As the Heritage piece revealed, Jack had too much pride for that. He decided instead that he had no choice but to try to restore the Orthodox networks that had disconnected from Roth Bookseller. So he fell back on his greatest strength, his knowledge of and abilities at collecting. With the money coming in from his supporters, he added more Orthodox and traditional Jewish materials. He invited an Orthodox silver wholesaler and an Orthodox sofer, a scribe and rabbi, to set up their shops within his store. He put the sofer behind the glass wall of the corner room that had originally separated his small collection of Jewish paintings from the book collection, thinking to show him off as evidence of his traditionalist bona fides and as a convenient publicity attraction, too. Was it a capitulation? A strategic one, yes. He was under surveillance as verified by his black polyester velvet yarmulke. So he needed to figure out a concise way to visually signal that his store was frum receptive without compromising the rest of his collection. You must have everything, right? Then why not include more rather than move things around and ruin the order that took him years to perfect? He would simply add what amounted to 2 new sections on the sales floor. Let's call them fine silver Judaica and scribal arts, and a new subject category in the religious literature section, hashkafa. Jack was well aware that this translates as worldview or outlook, and was well aware that that in Orthodox usage it refers to developing a correct Jewish ideological perspective that's firmly based on halakha, the expression of God's will in law and rabbinic legal reasoning. Signal sent. What choice did he have anyway? He was yeshiva educated. He knew the texts they revered and was conversant in the varieties of Jewish religiosity these works had inspired, as well as the passions they had provoked among those who saw themselves as trembling before God. He'd have to tremble a bit too if he wanted to blend in. And for a while it worked. Both the silver dealer and the sofer brought a burst of customers and energy to the store, and Jack, socializing with the silver dealer in particular, gained him some contact with the younger Orthodox clientele, as well as inside information about the Orthodox synagogues and businesses back on Pico Boulevard. A few of them had started selling prayer books and religious goods. Unwittingly, though, my father had turned his store from a busy network node and living library into a museum. Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimblet's work on the use of objects in ethnography enabled me to see in retrospect that Jack's sofer exhibit and the scribe's performance of culture suggested that authentic Jewish tradition belonged literally to religious insiders, relegating non-observant outsiders to the role of audience and cultural tourists. Despite Jack's attempt to update rather than rearrange his sales floor so as to recapture his centrality among LA's Jewish networks, what had once seemed a hospitable and inviting space now appeared staged and contested. It discomforted some of his reform and secular customers who were happy to support his fight against the neo-traditionalist boycott, but for whom the new store, with its Orthodox set dressing, no longer felt entirely theirs. In any event, the solution didn't hold. Business was booming in the Orthodox sector, and Pico Boulevard was its epicenter. The lease on Jack's old store there was taken over by a sizable kosher grocery, and by 1993, the street's financial lure helped unravel his arrangements with the silver dealer and the sofer. Doing well, but ruining the lack of pedestrian traffic on Olympic Boulevard, the dealer decided he wanted his own retail location and opened Brenko Sterling Silver on Pico. He soon added Jewish books, too. As for the sofer, he'd often stayed in the store after my father closed up for the night, working on Torah scrolls, tefillin, mezuzahs, and plans. Jack told me he knew that the young rabbi was doing business on the side without him. When the sofer pulled out, he too went to Pico and started his own bookstore, the 613 Mitzvah Store, which carried only kosher Sforim and ritual goods. The younger Jews weren't buying at my store, Jack explained when I asked him what happened after that. And my older clients weren't frummies, he added. I was losing the retail trade. And so At the end here, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I feel like my father's story means for his generation of American Jews. In the rest of the book, I do talk about that legacy at more length. The store eventually had to close because City National Bank declined to renew its line of credit to the store, and they demanded their $12,000 back from him that he still owed on it. That was really the end of the store. There was some legal maneuvering at that point that I wasn't privy to, but essentially my father sold the remaining inventory to Moshe Gabbai at the House of David, and he used the proceeds to pay off City National Bank. And so what I think, real shortly, what his legacy is that by supporting and seeding Jewish learning, solidarity, and self-definition, his store helped to grow the LA Jewish community into the second largest Jewish community in the United States. But like I said, I'll end just by giving you a little sense of my take of how my father's story speaks to the larger story of his generation of American Jews. This is from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, the last mini chapter, when my father came to stay with us during the pandemic, the very last time that he visited me and my family in our home. After dinner, he goes upstairs to our guest bedroom to read Gerald Frank's The Deed. A few days before, Jack had asked me for a book to keep him occupied. About a tenth of the books in my home library are from his, so I figured I'd find something he might have once enjoyed or kept in the store. Of course, I walked him over to my shelves, just as he taught me, and as we looked over the titles on one, Isaac Babel's The Collected Stories, Cecil Roth's Gleanings, Cynthia Ozick's Art and Ardor, Sholem Asch's East River, he reached for the Frank book. My copy is a first printing from 1963, and on the flyleaf in my father's neat and precise hand is written $20, OP. An interesting choice, I thought. He usually gravitated to biographies and histories. The Deed is a true crime book about the political assassination at Cairo in 1944 of Lord Moyne, the minister resident for the Middle East. He was killed by two young members of the Stern Gang, an extremist right-wing Jewish liberation group, officially known as Lehi, the Hebrew acronym for Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, whose acts of terror against the British earned it both condemnation and a grudging respect among Jews in pre-state Palestine and worldwide. Perhaps Jack wanted something that would retell a story he knew from his youth. A day or so later, we're in my study talking about nothing in particular when he suddenly says, "I think they'll get away." "Who will, Dad?" "The two boys. I think they'll get away in the end. Don't you?" "I think they will." I realize he's talking about The Deed. "Yeah, maybe," I lie. Did he not remember how the story went? Yitzhak Shamir, the future Prime Minister of Israel, who took over from Avraham Stern after he was killed by the British, sent Eliyahu Beit Zuri and Eliyahu Hakim to shoot Moyne. Both were hanged for it on March 22, 1945, each singing Hatikvah before the trapdoor swung open beneath them. It was one of the most controversial events in Zionist history up to that time, and it ramped up the political bad blood between the right and the left among Israel's founders. Jack lived through the event. He was 12 when they died, 30 and working for Behrman House when Frank's book was published. How could he have not heard the story before? And then it occurs to me that whether his unknowing was caused by his dementia or simply revealed an embarrassing gap in his literary and historical knowledge is beside the point. For my father, raised on the promise of a better future for himself and for Jews in America, the hope of averting a bad ending was and always would be evergreen. Notwithstanding his store's demise and Leahy's noxious influence on Zionism in Israel, Jack's clinging to the better conclusion seems to me an essential part of his worldview, of his story. He worked hard, he raised himself up, he tried to make things better, cleaner, and more fit for his customers and his community. The past was to be respected, but it didn't get a veto. The present is just the future unfolding, and how one conducts oneself along the way is the true measure of one's worth. No matter that circumstances might lay out a hard road leading to a disappointing terminus, meeting this with duty done and honor intact enables a final escape and the happy ending. I wish I could believe in that kind of ending too, but I'm of a different generation. I tend to put quotation marks around many of the words so important to my father, and it takes real effort for me to understand, much less inhabit, his certitude about the world. Unhappy endings seem much more believable to me, perhaps because the store's failure was such an essential part of my life's education. It became the type of story I preferred. When Jack finished the deed and returned it to me, all he said was, "Very sad." Not long after, he left for Los Angeles, where for a time he stayed in an assisted living facility until he moved back home to be near the things that made him feel well kept and comfortable. In Selinsgrove, we spent days dissecting my father's long visit, and eventually Jonah offered me this interpretation of his Zadie story. All he cared about was presentation. He didn't care about money, Jonah insisted. He'd have had to go backwards in time to keep up with the future. He didn't want to be Orthodox. He wanted to be upscale, dignified, and clean, and it defined his life. I'm not certain about the money part, although the rest of it rings true enough. It chimes, too, with the larger story of American Jews in the mid-20th century, striving for social acceptance and hustling to fit Jewishness into a white mainstream. That's one meaning of upscale. Their story is almost over now, its characters steadily passing away each year, and most of the Jewish bookstores that once helped retail it have vanished. Sitting with my father and talking about the store and books and customers and conflicts and the stratagems needed to keep them all in line was in some ways an act of nostalgia, a chance to recreate one last time the soundscape of his sales floor through a conversation he'd often had there and with me. It allowed both of us to consider in our own ways and for our own stories the end of the order on the bookshelves of my father's generation of American Jews. Like his memory, that order was deconstructing in plain sight, and both of us knew it. For me, I realized that I'd reached a conclusion that was neither happy nor unhappy, but rather another beginning, the uncertain future of its retellings by my son and by those with whom I'll share it in trust and in love. And for my father? "Hi, Dad. How's it going?" I'm on the phone checking up on Jack, trying to gauge if he's declined any further this week. "Okay, I do the best I can." "That's good. I'm doing the best I can." "Great, that's fine. And you're getting outside and walking?" Outside, no, not so much. Some days I can walk, around the block, but I do the best I can. I'm doing the best I can." "Good. Okay, it's hard to hear you, so I thank you for seeing me, and in the meantime, I'll do the best I can. Bye." Having done the best he can is where we leave it then. He at home finally, and me 3,000 miles away, still holding onto my cell phone and to everything left unsaid in our short call. Thank you. Thanks.
It's a pretty poignant ending.
It's the truth as I felt it at that time. My dad had tried really hard, I think in his own mind, and objectively to do the right thing as he understood that. And even though it sometimes didn't feel that way, living inside the family, I wanted to, do him justice and do him honor and give him the last word on, what he thought he was trying to do. He was just trying to do the best he could.
Yeah. So I asked you at lunch, how is the project of arriving at resolution in your relationship with your father going? And you said,
It's always ongoing, but I feel like I've reached a point now, having written the book, having really tried hard to understand his perspective on things, and trying to see the bookstore through his eyes as well as through mine, where I can obviously forgive a lot of the stuff that I talk about in the book. And I think most everyone has had some version of that experience in really trying to think about, what we've inherited from our parents or our families, and what would be the way of either coming to terms with that, accepting it, or moving on from it, and trying to see if there's anything that we can actually learn from it. That is something I'm still working with. But I would say to you that there are some days that I wake up and I think, I'm still a little peeved.
about that. Yeah, and there's plenty in the book that you can pick at to try and discover what that might be. So we're going to talk, by the way, for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open up for 15 minutes of your questions. I want to talk about, I guess, the beginning and the end of the story, and maybe some stuff in between. But let's begin with the beginning. Tell us about the origins of this project. And I was like, trying to imagine to myself what you said when you began. Like, what I'm going to do is produce an homage to the Jewish book in mid-20th century America. What I'm going to do is offer tribute to my father, the great Jewish bookseller, or what I'm going to do is exorcise the demons that dwell within me. Probably a little bit of all of those things.
It
But
was.
Can you tell us what you had in mind when you started out?
So I knew in some very deep recess of my mind that I had all these memories and I was going to have to do something with them. And I realized too that a lot of what I was writing about in my scholarship was only because of things that I discovered at his bookstore. You know, I wrote my first book on Jewish detective stories. I discovered those stories in my dad's bookstore. Nobody in those days was talking about Jewish detective stories, right? I discovered Jewish comic books in my dad's bookstore, and that's also something that I was writing about. So I had all this stuff, but my father had this really unique habit of constantly sending me this slow stream of material from the store. You know, at first it was just some papers, and I was like, what am I going to do with this? Okay, goes to the side. And then he started sending me more and more. Sometimes it was a box of books or things like that. And I realized that I was developing this kind of archive of my dad's bookstore.
Yeah, pause here. Tell us about that archive. What was it?
The archive, it was amazing. It was an amazing thing to grow up in. It was oftentimes feeling like you had gone down a rabbit hole, but you weren't scared of it. It was a place where you could find all this material that taught me about Jewish history in a way that was different from just learning about dates or particular events. It was learning about personalities. My dad always had a story about the writers in the store. So he would take me over to the large bookcase in the Pico store that was on the far side, where he kept the philosophy and the history and the academic books and the fiction books. And he took out Isaac Bashevis Singer and his brother I.J. Singer, and he would tell me a story to help me tell the difference between the two, so I could sell that to a customer. But also, that's how I learned that Isaac Bashevis Singer, that's all people ever talk about. What happened to I.J.? And then I had that archive.
So that's the oral Torah. Jack, what's the written Torah? What'd you get in those boxes?
Oh, what did I get in the boxes? I would just get some of his older books that he just didn't have room for anymore. So a lot of them were books of philosophy, or the entire Loeb version of the Josephus' Jewish War, and things like that. Plato in Hebrew. So that I would have that on hand, so I knew that that was there. Again, something else I never knew was out there. So yeah, the written Torah was also pretty full. But coming to have that in my house, it made it clear to me. I kept feeling like Gene Wilder in Young Frankenstein, destiny, no escaping, that's for me, because it was inevitable that I was going to have to write about that.
Okay, and recreate, if you can, the arc of your emotional journey in writing this book. What you said you wanted to do at the outset, what you said, midway through, and sort of making your way to that moment which moved you here in our presence today.
At the beginning, it was, I'm telling this story my way. I'm in charge. And I literally say that in that opening mini chapter, but I really wanted to be the one to say, okay, I have the memories. I worked at the store. I know what happened. I had the interactions with my dad. I'm going to tell this story, and that's for me to tell. And of course, I became humble very quickly as I began to hear all the different stories and realize as I got midway through, wait a minute, this isn't just about me and my dad, right? It's a bigger story. I remember that a real important moment for me was going to the Lower East Side and trying to trace where all the early Jewish booksellers who started out in the 1880s, 1890s, and then turn of the 20th century were located. And I realized, oh my God, this is the world that my dad inherited. These guys were doing some really amazing things. They were also so close to each other, they were clearly cutthroat competitors as well as colleagues. That must have been fun. To see each other in the street and realize, oh, that guy's undercutting me. But that's also how the Hebrew Publishing Company came to be, because they started doing business together. And okay, let's start a publishing company, even though at the same time they all had their own separate bookstores while they were working together in that publishing company, right? So I started realizing it was a bigger story, and that really took me through discovering Harelik's backstory, really reminded me that there was a larger story to tell about Harelik's connection to a kind of Yiddishist background that my father's store was inherited. And then at the end, I came back to, all right, here's the story. I could either make this really unhappy and angry, or I could make this something a little more objective, try to pull back a little bit, and to give both my father and my mother equal time here. And to allow them to sort of speak for themselves. And I would just simply say, that's what it was. You folks tell me what you make of the legacy. You folks read about this now and determine what does it look like from your perspective. So the ending is where I really thought I was going to leave it up to the readers.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to bounce it back to you and ask you, wherein lay Jack Roth's greatness?
I think his greatness lay in two things. His taste as a collector. He really, really understood the Jewish book, and he just knew what was worth collecting. He knew the stories that gave a book that may have seemed to maybe someone else to be, well, this is just an old Jewish book, but he would know the press. He would know the personalities that wrote it. He understood that people would purchase it not just for what the book was, but for all of the kind of narrative that was embedded in it and the understanding of what it meant in Jewish history. So he was really great at that. But the second thing that was part of his greatness is he was always educating himself. And I realized this even after I finished the book, because I continue to get boxes from him, and I found one book on learning Yiddish. It was just it was
Joffen.
Gene
Joffen, 1962.
It wasn't the Joffen, but it was a book about the origin of Yiddish words. I can't remember what the title was, and all throughout is my father's writing, where he's trying, even though he knew Yiddish really well, he was trying to learn more about the origin of Yiddish words, where they came from, how they developed, how the grammar developed, so that he could learn more and more about it.
So what did Jack read? What were his literary tastes?
He loved history and biography. He really did love history and biography. And the more famous the person was, or I should say sometimes the more infamous the person was, the better for him. So he would read both, biographies of Jews, but also biographies of just, great celebrities or statesmen from the time when he grew up.
Yeah, there is, beyond the personal level, an added poignancy to the story, because what you chronicle is not only the rise and fall of a great bookstore, but arguably the rise and fall of the golden age of American Jewish culture, and I would say certainly the American Jewish book, the Jewish book in America. And I think of that in the following regard. Part of what was so amazing to me about that bookstore when I first made my way there in April 1988 to the Pico store was to see this incredible bounty of books produced by university-based scholars in Jewish studies. It was the golden age, or at the beginning of the golden age of academic Jewish studies. And there are very few places in the world where you could find many of those contributions collected and available for sale. Jack really sort of caught that wave, rode it until those two forces that you mentioned entered into the story, which is, say, the superstores, the Borders before the Amazons, and sort of the shifting taste and sociology of American and LA Jewish culture.
Yeah.
But there is, I mean, I have the sense like there's no place you can go anymore to find that
No.
collection of material.
Yeah.
So we were witness to this incredible era.
Yeah.
Jack was at the center of it. And it's not just that J. Roth didn't succeed in lasting longer than it did.
Mm-hmm.
That arc also came to its end,
Yeah.
it seems to me. So I wonder, you're a student of American Jewish literature, I'm a student of Jewish history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that same sense of a kind of declensionist narrative to the story?
I do. I mean, I was aware when I finished the book of all of this new material coming out now, bemoaning the decline of American Jewish life. And it's true, though, it's really becoming something different, I would argue. But that said...
I'm thinking less in Josh Leifer terms, and more in terms of sort of the book.
The book. It's true. The movement of the Jewish book into the trade press mainstream in New York City after the Second World War was really remarkable. Rachel Gordan, in her book, Post-War Stories, talks about this as a sort of introduction to Judaism books. Yeah. And it's true. Those were coming out both from trade presses. They were also coming out from Jewish presses. It just was the right time. The Jewish Book Council put out a little booklet on opening up a Jewish bookstore back in the, I believe it was late 50s. When they put that out, because there was so much out there, it was possible to do that. But also, my father was, as you said, he was there at the right moment, right? For the Jewish book to come out, there was also a kind of détente between all the different streams of Judaism, especially in Los Angeles, all the different ways of being Jewish, because everybody understood we're kind of new here still. This town is receptive, but maybe not necessarily entirely receptive. So we need a place where we can all have the materials that we want available to us in our books to be. And so it becomes a kind of library for the Jewish community in that sense, that sort of living library. So he's right at the right place at the right time, but he also sees that there's all this different material out there, and if it can all be in one place, then not only Jewish literature gets to be more celebrated and recognized, right? Because people would come into the store, they'd look at all the Jewish literature on the bookcase, and they'd realize that makes any of the Jewish sections in any of the general bookstores in Los Angeles look ridiculous, right? There was almost nothing in those sections. You walk into his store and there it all was. And so he was able to show both Jews and non-Jews, here is the wide panoply of Jewish literature. This is what it looks like when we're not concerned to say who's authentic, who's inauthentic, who's in or who's out. Who's kosher or who's not kosher.
Right. I mean, literary tastes change. Yeah, that's the nature of things.
Right.
I remember very well what it looked like at the Olympic store. Mm-hmm. I remember, going in and seeing over the course of time the shifting inventory. I remember Jack's laments about the shifting clientele. I remember his sense of, it's an uphill struggle that, is a kind of Sisyphean task.
Yeah.
I mean, we can lament, the loss of something perhaps was also gained by it, but what it seems to me was lost was a readership of serious works of scholarship by people other than just scholars. Mm-hmm. And sort of we've, in some sense, cycled back to an era of specialization where just scholars read the works of scholars. Mm-hmm. And what has displaced that more generalist appetite is another kind of generalist appetite, which is a generalist appetite for, what we might see for Kodesh, religious books. I'm thinking here of, I don't know if you know, Chaim Soloveitchik's classic essay about sort of the emergence of a whole new genre of literature. Sort of, it became acceptable in the Orthodox community to write a book about your halachic innovations, even if you weren't the leading scholar of the generation.
Right,
sort of,
right.
A shift from morality to written form. And that created a different kind of generalist appetite that wasn't the one that Jack was sort of well positioned to serve.
Right.
So there are shifting, we should take stock of shifting, but I do feel some sense of longing for that generalist readership that was interested in historical questions, sociological questions, and could find them at Jack Roth.
Right. It was curated, but it wasn't hyper curated, which is what that work is now, right? Because you have to reach particular niches. We've broken down the reading audience into such fine-grained differentiations that it's impossible to do that sort of generalist thing, even though you're right. We've got more material written, like Leifer's book, written towards a general audience, but who really is reading that? At least in my dad's bookstore, what he lucked out in, but also was very good at generally curating, was the idea that you walk into the bookstore and you discover what you didn't even know you wanted, or you didn't even know you needed about Jewish life and Jewish practice, or a fiction book. Maybe you'd never heard of As a Driven Leaf, and yet you walk into the store and there it is. That's a book now that I don't know anybody that carries As a Driven Leaf. Maybe Eichler's, but I doubt it. I doubt it.
That's a good question. We're going to open up now for questions, but I just want to say that this presentation and the project would make Arnie Band very, very happy. He really, I mean, he'd have some critical comments, to be sure,
I
as
hope
was
so.
his way, but I think he'd be delighted and really stimulated by the way in which you've brought to life such an important world that he knew so well here in Los Angeles.
Thank you. It really means a lot to me to be doing this in Arnie's memory.
Okay, let's open up for questions. Yes, in the back, please. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've never asked, but did Jack write anything? Was he a writer? Was he an author of anything?
He was, actually. Thank you for asking that question. He wrote a lot of presentations to libraries, for professional presentations about the history of the Jewish book, about the history of Jewish publishing, and he would give these at conferences that he would go to, where, of course, he would table. He'd set up a table to sell books, but also they would ask him to give a quick talk, and he would write those out. And I actually have a number of those that I actually wrote, I typed, I should say, for him, because once I got a computer, my dad kept giving me stuff to type up for him and then print it out. But he also, he loved writing out small things, and he would always have this kind of florid way about his writing, but it was very much his voice and his style. So I would say that while he would definitely tell you he was not a writer, there was a writerly impulse in him, always. Thank you, thank you. That book bag is courtesy of my cousin Sheila.
Open this for me. Lawrence, can you open this for me?
Yes, sorry.
And you can read about it.
Well, you can read about that because that is a chapter, that's the mini chapter entitled USSR 1976. But let me tell you about that. 1976.
I almost went, and then I got scared. I spoke with your father.
Right? And he probably told
I
you.
consider your father a hero. I really do.
And that's exactly how I put it in that mini chapter. That was the section you asked me when, how my attitude towards things changed as I was writing the book. When I got to that chapter, I felt the same way. Like, we felt living inside a Jewish bookstore, like I said, felt like a kind of imprisonment. But for people like the folks who lived in the USSR, the refuseniks, who did not have the privilege that we did, who didn't have access to the sorts of books that I saw and took for granted, someone coming and bringing them that, a bookseller, who's coming to do what booksellers, Jewish booksellers have done, which is to provide people with the culture and the knowledge that they need to continue a culture. That was, I think, I agree with you, very heroic. And he met some real characters. And for him, it was a way for him to sort of give back. But I also thought of him as a kind of secret agent, because it was like being a secret agent those times, traveling around. He was a perfect secret agent because he had, just had a divorce. He was single. He was alone, and he had very clear ideas of how he ought to do his mission.
So he went with his sister?
He went with my Aunt Eula, which was Lynn, your mom, his brother Mike, Rabbi Michael Roth's wife.
Sister-in-law.
Wife, yeah.
Right,
so is his sister-in-law. Yes.
Question back there.
I have a two-part question, which I think is the flip side of the same coin. when your dad was at the peak and during the peak of the golden age, how did vendors and people in business elsewhere in the country, particularly New York, how did they respond to that, or did they not respond at all? And the flip side of that question is, in the end, how did Jack change the world? What was his legacy in the Jewish?
Before you answer this question, I just want to let everybody know books are available for sale, and I encourage you to buy them.
No, thank you for that question, Michael. Let me take the second one first. You know, the legacy is much like what I just read. You know, he tried to do his best to lift the community up and to really help people realize that there was a certain kind of beauty and honor to Jewish life, Jewish observance, Jewish identity. Even those that were assembled by people on their own as a kind of do-it-yourself Judaism, that all was worthy of respect. And that we ought to be open to thinking about how folks can create their own sense of what their identity or what their understanding of their own culture is. I think that's a big part of it. The Jewish publishers loved him. Are you kidding me? I mean, he was selling their books like crazy, and they really thought, this is terrific. At one point in the book, I do say, though, that the textbook publishers, like Bernie Sharfstein and Katav,
That is astounding.
My dad carried Katav textbooks for many, many years, and then when he decided to really put his attention into retail, he called up Bernie Sharfstein and said, you know, I'm not going to do textbooks anymore. And Sharfstein said, why not? He said, well, I'm not really making money on it. And Sharfstein said, well, I am.
Wait, Jack was buying $75,000 a year worth of
$75,000 worth
books.
of books was going back to Bernie Sharfstein on that. So no wonder he wanted it. But, you know, they all treated him like a friend. But at the end, of course, there was only so far friendship went.
Russia.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
You know, both the story of kind of the biography of your father and also the wider picture of Los Angeles. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
I guess my question is somewhat speculative. 1994 is an interesting date to kind of the terminal point in your story, because that was the year that Amazon was founded. And I was wondering if you spoke to your father, you know, in subsequent years, or you yourself, having delved so deeply into the topic, would have some reflections of what you think of the world we're living in today, particularly because two things that you mentioned in your talk and in the book, I suppose. The one is the way in which your father was thinking so far ahead from his early years, not having that kind of bookstore which was just a collection of random objects that you would have to sort through, but the way that he thought was kind of far ahead and kind of equitable would come with the internet. And the second thing is his kind of, as Professor Myers would say, his Catholic vision of Judaism and incorporated just so much into so many versions of Judaism. You have a phenomenon today where, you know, ultra-religious Jews are interested in university press books and secular culture, and people who are maybe perhaps secular Jews are interested in more religious books, and new translation systems are accessible. So I was wondering in that period after 1994, you can reflect a little bit yourself on what your father said about the future of the Jewish book.
Yeah, no, he was profoundly disappointed and unhappy at that point. Now, that, of course, was part of the trauma of closing the store for him, I'm certain. But he felt that things had reverted back to the Jewish bazaar, to the chaos of the Lower East Side. You know, the things that he said about places like Eichler's or, you know, now Pinsker's and places like that, probably I shouldn't repeat. Because he felt that those stores had in some ways betrayed the Jewish book trade. And he didn't really want to have anything to do with it for a long while. And I would, you know, oftentimes tell him, you know, look at this or look at that, or, you know, go online and you'll see some of these stores. He wasn't big on going online and the computer, but he learned how to use it well enough so that he could see what these places were doing. But he never really saw a store that he thought was, you know, following through on the sorts of vision that he had. Now, you're absolutely right about today, where, I don't know, maybe in a place like New York, you could get away with a store that tried a little bit to do what he was doing. It would be really an interesting experiment, though not financially lucrative at all. But it was certainly something he didn't live long enough to become aware of. For him, he didn't feel defeated. He felt like he had done his job and he had really left a legacy. But he did feel like, the Jewish bookstore reverted to what it always was, and maybe that's what it needed to do in order to make money, because that treating books the way that you see them in the old microcosm stores, not even a general bookstore can make money just on books alone. You have to have the non-book inventory as well. And in the microcosm store, the non-book inventory is ritual goods and so on and so forth, right? So disappointed, but at peace with that, absolutely.
Yeah, final question.
So I got here a little early, and I was waiting outside the main entrance of Royce Hall, waiting for the throng. But in so doing, I met Adrienne, and she told me Jack used to give free Yiddish lessons in Stoner Park. Can you confirm?
Yes, this is true. In his retirement years, he made a very, thank you for mentioning it, and thank you also for saying that. He felt it was still his responsibility to give back and to work for the community and to do what he could. And teaching Yiddish was one of the things that he could do. And he enjoyed it a great deal because, again, it allowed him to continue to educate himself about the language, even though, he was teaching other people about it. So thank you for mentioning that. That's a great final question.
Right, and expressing our thanks to Laurence, I think we can take this opportunity to really express our appreciation and gratitude to Jack Roth.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you.
Please, there are refreshments in the back, books to be purchased, and Laurence is here.
I am here.